Thank you. That was not Rag 3 quite, but the C-sharp minor. And of course, Rachmaninoff himself was a great performer. And I think the performer plays a pivotal role now, as far as classical music is concerned, between music and society. I mean, whereas before you might have had the composer, but they're now all dead. So it's very important for there to be posthumous promotion and perpetuation. And Rachmaninoff was a great performer himself. In the history of classical music, you had Paganini, you had Liszt, and Liszt was probably the greatest piano performer of all time. I mean, he was actually...
Can I say he was an utter bastard? It's because of him that we aren't allowed to use music when we play. The solo piano recital was invented by him. So us poor schmucks have to spend 2 hours killing ourselves rather than having other people take the blame as well when things go wrong.
But he was not a snob, and he was very endearing, and he was always welcoming to the audience and so forth. So he was a great man. And in a minute, you're also going to play a transcription by the great Liszt. I just want to ask Stephen, again, of course, because I think you want to hear him more, on what you think the role of the performer now is. What should people do in terms of classical music? Because there are so many classical composers who have almost alienated themselves. I mean, Harrison, third whistle, made the famous remark when he was charged with the accusation that his music was inaccessible to the audience. He said, "I don't care about the audience. I'm not running a restaurant." I mean, that was the kind of arrogance.
It is a kind of arrogance. It's one that permeated throughout modernism. I mean, if you count modernism as roughly the first 10 years of the 20th century, with philosophers like T. Hume, and then Pound and Fenollosa and Eliot and in poetry, and Wyndham Lewis and Blast, and then the poetry was followed by, or in fact contemporaneously, the painting became extremely inaccessible to the public. You could argue that with painting, the camera had, as it were, overtaken the need to represent reality in the way that paint used to. With music, it was harder to do so. Modernism became a big problem. There was suddenly a group of artists who hated the bourgeois, were not after comfort. They didn't, novelists didn't want to comfort them with plot. Poets didn't want to comfort them with rhyme and shape. Musicians didn't want to comfort them with harmony and melody. And a lot of the world was outraged by modernism. And then the First World War kind of made an even bigger mess of all that. And we've never really recovered. Essentially, modern art, modern sculpture and installation has gone as far as it ever could do since Marcel Duchamp hung a urinal. But when it comes to performing, it's a wholly different thing. Because really, you are in the same position that, say, Laurence Olivier is in. You have in front of you a vast literature that you can perform.
It's infinite.
And like an actor. I'm not saying, well, Laurence Olivier, you know what I mean? An actor. I choose an actor's name. Or Mike Rylance, whoever you want to choose. Yeah. Actors can interpret the works of others. It's a very specific job. There are writers and actors who write and act, and there are singer-songwriters. And it's a very interesting point. In the contemporary pop world, the only ones who survive, I would say, more than 5 years, to be honest, are those who write the songs they sing. It's no accident, whatever one might have thought of Take That when they began, that Gary Barlow, who was sort of the rather sad little joke of Take That in the very beginning, almost all of you too young to remember when Take That began, is now the rather dignified and impressive figure, because he's the one who wrote the songs. And Lennon and McCartney survived because they wrote the songs. Elton John is not the star he still is after nearly 40 years, because he's a fine singer, although his voice is rather remarkable. He writes the songs. The Rolling Stones wrote most of the songs, not all, but a lot of them. Most of them, they wrote the songs. Adele writes her songs. These people last. In my world, it's comedy. John Cleese, I remember telling me a story years ago. He told me about when he was starting out, one of his number, whom I shan't mention, who was amongst the most popular, pre-Python, amongst the most popular when they did a radio series, came in and said, I'm fed up with writing, I'm not going to do the writing anymore. And John Cleese said, I thought that was all rather odd. I can't understand why. Writing is difficult, and it is difficult. It's unbelievable, it's the hardest part. But it's the part that keeps you in work, and it's the part that nurtures you as a performer. So there are these are different ways of performing art. There is the singer-songwriter, there is the writer-performer, and then there is the interpretive artist, whether they're a dancer, an actor, or an instrumentalist such as yourself. Now, the big question for you is whether you're satisfied with it. There is, as you know, in the world of classical music, a little opening that every pianist has, every individualist has. Hey! I am such an innocent. It's pathetic, really. I'm made by name by saying bottom at inappropriate moments, and still I fall into it every time. Oh, that's anyway. There is the possibility of the cadenza. You've probably heard the word cadenza. It's that thing usually in a concerto where the orchestra goes quiet and the pianist is allowed to improvise. Is allowed to make up their own bit. There are some, like there are some Mozart, the D minor concerto where Beethoven's cadenza is so great that it would be a very arrogant pianist who didn't use that particular cadenza. But it's amazing, actually, how people like, you can't be that good at the piano, James, without actually also being able to fiddle around on it. And I bet you improvise a lot. I'm not asking you to now. Though one day we will be on the stage and I will ask you to. And
you can try it.
Yeah, it would be fun.
Yes, it will.
Yeah.
I think we've hit the bit that we could probably have talked about all night if we'd wanted to, and that is the bit where they divided. I have a problem with this because obviously classic plays largely the stuff from pre-1900 and the tuneful stuff. I personally realise that my own tastes fall mid-20th century. My favourites are Stravinsky, Britten, people like that. I like what the modernists did, I like why they did it, I like the way we came back from it. But I equally agree with Stephen that we'd had, 600 years of the same language, more or less. Yeah. You're not going to get used to this language overnight. You can't just say, well, from Fair Clef to Nacht, suddenly we all like this language. I think there is a process to go through. Yes. And I think maybe a little bit of advice would be start with Webern, because he's short for a start anyway.
Yes.
Webern and Schoenberg. I think Fair Clef to Nacht is totally...
Schoenberg, for example, all the serialism and atonal music and so forth, which intellectually and historically very important, nonetheless is very difficult.
It's staggeringly beautiful. Staggeringly.
But Webern, I remember, he wrote symmetrical notes on a score. It looks absolutely beautiful, but when you actually listen to it, it sounds horrible. I never understood that.
I have a massive problem with contemporary music. I've got to say, I get sent scores all the time, and what I don't understand is what Rachmaninoff did, which is so brave, which is at a time when everyone's trying to kind of, like that guy said so eloquently, kind of shock and awe and the emancipation of dissonance and all of that stuff. He stuck to his big Russian romantic guns and wrote these gorgeous melodies. I would to God a contemporary composer now actually wrote a fucking tune.
Stravinsky is no good, the right of string?
Of course, there are exceptions to the rule. There are exceptions.
There are loads of exceptions. If you look at
loads of exceptions.
Eric Whittaker is writing some, maybe not things like the Seal Lullaby, but if you look at some of his Sleep, things like that, you're getting some very... No, I won't. If you're getting some very, very interesting music there that people are lapping
at. Film music does it beautifully.
Yeah,
it's symphonic and it's gorgeous.
Yeah. One day you'll probably change your mind. But anyway, you now got to go and perform something slightly chocolate boxy, but I'm going to let you introduce
Very kind of you, thank you.